The Nigerian political stage has been jolted once again, not by another electoral contest or a controversial tribunal ruling, but by a thunderous assertion echoing from the mouth of actor, lawyer, and Labour Party chieftaincy, Kenneth Okonkwo. In what is now reverberating through social media channels, courtrooms, party secretariats, and everyday street debates, Okonkwo reminded the nation of a seemingly straightforward constitutional principle: the term of a president or governor is for years. What on the surface appears to be a reaffirmation of constitutional civics has instead triggered a chain reaction of tension, speculation, and fierce introspection across Nigeria's fractured democratic landscape. Why does this matter now? Because Okonkwo's statement is not just a legal footnote, it's a direct challenge to the dangerous ambiguity being peddled by some political actors who appear increasingly willing to interpret constitutional provisions as mere suggestions rather than binding mandates. In this high-stakes moment, Okonkwo's declaration is more than just a recitation of law. It is an alarm bell, calling attention to what many Nigerians fear: an erosion of constitutional order under the weight of political expediency. In this powerful expose, we will unpack the layers beneath Okonkwo's sharp pronouncement, trace the legal and political history surrounding presidential and gubernatorial term limits in Nigeria, and reveal how this issue touches the very soul of the nation's democratic integrity. We will explore how this comment has exposed rifts not just between parties but within the ruling All Progressives Congress (APC) and even within the divided opposition. Public frustration, judicial silence, and executive overreach are all converging to create a moment of reckoning, and Kenneth Okonkwo, perhaps unknowingly, may have just lit the fuse. But this story doesn't live in isolation. We'll also examine how similar constitutional principles were tested and sometimes twisted during the Obasanjo third-term saga, Jonathan's succession battle post-Yar'Adua, and Buhari's re-election. Each episode left lasting scars on Nigeria's institutional fabric and shaped the country's tense relationship with term limits. Now, with the public growing increasingly disillusioned with democratic delivery, Okonkwo's assertion is being read not only as a warning but also as a line in the sand. If you have ever questioned who really controls the levers of power in Nigeria, or how the Constitution can be used or abused to extend political lifespans beyond their lawful expiration dates, this video is your deep dive into the heart of it. Stay with us as we journey through the law, the players, the betrayals, and the hope still hanging in the balance. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to keep the conversation alive and the pressure on. Let's dissect the facts behind the firestorm and why Kenneth Okonkwo's words may just be the trigger for Nigeria's next democratic showdown. At the heart of Kenneth Okonkwo's declaration is a constitutional axiom so basic, yet so politically explosive, that it forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Nigeria's constitutional guardrails, particularly regarding executive tenure, are under increasing pressure from both political actors and institutional silence. The statement, "the term of a president or governor is for years," as stated in the Constitution, should, in a functional democracy, be a redundant reminder. Yet in Nigeria's current political climate, it carries the weight of rebellion, especially as whispers grow louder around efforts to manipulate timelines, delay transitions, and reframe incumbency as a tool of indefinite political survival. Okonkwo's assertion, which at face value appears routine, was delivered with the urgency of someone who sees the slow unraveling of order. It is widely believed to be a preemptive strike against any covert attempt to circumvent term limits under the guise of court delays, electoral petitions, or claims of administrative irregularities. While he did not directly name names, the timing and tone of his speech unmistakably point toward concerns that some forces within the ruling establishment may be flirting with the idea of power extension, pre-judicial ambiguity, or constitutional manipulation. This concern is not unfounded. Nigeria's history is littered with attempts to either elongate tenures or invalidate legitimate transitions through technicalities. Consider the infamous third-term agenda of the Obasanjo era. In the early 2000s, subtle but coordinated moves were made to amend the Constitution to allow then-President Olusegun Obasanjo a third term in office. While Obasanjo denied the ambition publicly, the legislative machinery behind the proposal and the billions allegedly spent to influence lawmakers were too glaring to ignore. The public backlash was immense, civil society mobilized, and the National Assembly ultimately voted against it, preserving the sanctity of the two-term limit. However, that episode planted a seed, the idea that term limits could be tested and potentially broken if one had enough power and influence. Fast forward to 2010, when then-President Goodluck Jonathan assumed office following the death of President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. The question of whether Jonathan's completion of Yar'Adua's term would count toward his constitutional limit sparked intense legal and political debates. Ultimately, Jonathan contested the 2011 election and won. But when he sought a second term in 2015, his opponents, particularly from the then-opposition APC, argued that he had effectively overstayed. Though the Constitution was clear, the political elite once again found itself leveraging ambiguity for strategic gain. Today, the fears around tenure manipulation take a more subtle form, less about third terms and more about term elongation through court-induced uncertainty. The delays in electoral verdicts, inconsistent judicial interpretations, and the strategic dragging of tribunal decisions all create an atmosphere where an incumbent may remain in office far beyond the expected timeline. It is into this climate that Kenneth Okonkwo dropped his constitutional hammer, a public reminder that neither politics nor the courts have the moral authority to expand tenure beyond the clearly defined four-year threshold. In the context of current leadership, Okonkwo's words become even more piercing. While he did not mention President Tinubu by name, the undertones of his warning were felt across political lines. Tinubu, who emerged from a highly contested 2023 election, is already the subject of public scrutiny regarding the transparency of the process that brought him into office. With several legal battles, appeals, and political tensions still unresolved, Okonkwo's statement appears to be a warning against any hidden moves to extend the executive's stay in power under the pretext of pending litigation or unresolved technicalities. It is a line drawn in the sand. Meanwhile, the implications for state governors are equally serious. In states like Rivers, Benue, and Kaduna, political transitions are still under pressure from unresolved legal petitions, party feuds, and calls for rerun elections. The political class has long used transition chaos as an excuse to linger in office, controlling budgets, appointments, and security structures while the people await clarity. Kenneth Okonkwo's intervention is not just a national statement. It is a warning across the Federation that the people are watching, and the law is not elastic. Most telling, however, is the public response. Okonkwo's statement has lit up social media, particularly among Nigeria's growing youth voter base. Hashtags like #4years means for years, #respect the Constitution, and #obey the law have begun trending, transforming a legal principle into a popular movement. For many citizens, especially those disillusioned by the failings of successive governments, this moment feels like a rare alignment between public frustration and constitutional clarity. But why is this happening now? The simple answer is that Nigerians no longer trust that political transitions will follow the rulebook. The 2023 election cycle, widely criticized for voter suppression, electoral violence, and INEC inconsistencies, left a sour taste. The judiciary's role in post-election resolution is being viewed with increasing skepticism. Thus, when someone like Kenneth Okonkwo, who straddles the worlds of law, entertainment, and politics, calls out this creeping abnormality, the message cuts deeper than usual. In essence, we are witnessing a convergence of history, fear, and defiance. The lessons of Obasanjo, Jonathan, and even Buhari are being read in reverse as warnings, not precedents. Kenneth Okonkwo's message might seem elementary, but it's precisely in that simplicity that its power lies. It is a call to return to basics before the entire edifice crumbles. Kenneth Okonkwo's declaration didn't just trend, it fractured the silence of complicity that had long surrounded Nigeria's political elite and their quiet flirtation with constitutional boundaries. The media, mainstream and digital alike, responded with fervor, immediately recognizing the gravity of what had just been said. Leading television stations, radio analysts, and political bloggers latched onto the speech, not just for its legal weight but for its timing. It came in a political season marked by suspicion, delayed tribunal verdicts, and a growing fear that institutional inertia was becoming a tool for tenure elongation. What made the reaction so viral wasn't just the words "the term of a president" or "governor is for years," as stated in the Constitution, but who was saying it. Kenneth Okonkwo is not a fringe activist or anonymous legal theorist. He is a high-profile lawyer, Nollywood legend, and political spokesperson who served as a voice for the Labour Party during the 2023 elections. His credibility, combined with his emotional delivery and visible frustration, made the media treat the statement as a national alarm bell. Channels TV, Arise News, and dozens of independent commentators dissected the implications in real time, asking whether Nigeria was on the verge of yet another constitutional test and whether the public would sit still for it. Politically, the statement set off a chain reaction of discomfort, especially within the ruling APC, although the party did not officially respond. Key allies of the Tinubu administration began releasing op-eds and granting subtle interviews, urging the public to trust the judiciary and allow due process to unfold. The phrase due process quickly became a euphemism, in many circles, for judicial delay, a convenient means of extending political power while the legal dust settles. On the opposition side, however, Kenneth Okonkwo's stance was seen as a rallying cry. Labour Party supporters, youth movements, and even some former PDP loyalists began resharing his statement with the caption, "This is not about parties, it's about the people." That's when the stakeholder fallout became more pronounced. Civil society groups like SERP and Enough is Enough Nigeria issued press statements demanding that INEC and the judiciary release clear timelines for resolving post-election litigations. The Nigerian Bar Association, though traditionally conservative in such matters, faced pressure to take a public position. Human rights lawyers such as Femi Falana and Micah Zekome weighed in, arguing that any manipulation of 10-year timelines regardless of judicial proceedings violated the spirit of democratic succession. These legal heavyweights added intellectual firepower to Okonkwo's moral and political argument. And then came the governors. A few sitting state executives, especially those with legal battles still pending, began issuing veiled responses, some insisting they had the mandate of the people, others warning against external interference. In at least 3 states, youth protests erupted outside government houses, holding placards that read, "For years is not forever and courts are not thrones." The streets echoed what Kenneth Okonkwo had sparked, a popular demand for constitutional certainty in an era of elite improvisation. From a policy standpoint, the implications are staggering. First, Okonkwo's statement has reignited calls for electoral and judicial reforms not just in terms of conducting elections, but in how long courts are allowed to adjudicate electoral outcomes. Policy analysts have long argued that the practice of swearing in winners before legal disputes are settled creates a dangerous incentive to game the system. Now, Kenneth Okonkwo has inadvertently become the face of a legislative push to amend timelines, possibly requiring all electoral cases to be resolved before inauguration. Though the National Assembly has yet to formally debate this, the noise is building and lawmakers who ignore it do so at their own peril. Second, there's the question of executive restraint. Should a president or governor remain in office indefinitely while awaiting court rulings? The Constitution says no. Yet, precedent has said yes far too often. Okonkwo's rebuke has forced the country to examine that contradiction. Political strategists believe this moment may harden public opinion around the need for term enforcement mechanisms, perhaps through automatic handover to interim administrations pending legal resolutions, a radical, yet increasingly popular idea. Third, and perhaps most urgently, Okonkwo's remarks have reshaped the 2027 political conversation. As aspirants quietly position themselves for the next presidential contest, the specter of judicially induced tenure elongation casts a long shadow. Every delay, every vague statement from INEC or the courts, will now be viewed through a lens sharpened by Kenneth Okonkwo's warning. In that sense, his statement was not just about now, it was about the future, a preemptive strike to make sure 2027 does not become a sequel to 2023's legal ambiguities. Media outlets are already framing this moment as a defining test of Nigeria's democratic soul, not because of its drama, but because of its simplicity. A nation of over 200 million people is being asked to decide whether a 4-year term means what the Constitution says or what politics allows. And at the center of that debate stands Kenneth Okonkwo, not as a candidate but as a conscience. The public reaction to Kenneth Okonkwo's assertion was neither passive nor fleeting, it was electric, widespread, and emotionally charged. Across social media platforms, from X formerly Twitter to Facebook and TikTok, the phrase "4 years" is for years began trending as a rallying cry for a public long tired of legal technicalities and judicial ambiguities used to prolong political control. Memes, video snippets, and remix edits of Okonkwo's declaration saturated the digital space, often accompanied by old headlines showing governors or presidents extending their influence through courtroom limbo. For many Nigerians especially, the youth, this was not just about a statement. It was a reckoning. This collective sentiment is rooted in a painful national memory. Nigerians recall vividly the 1993 elections and the infamous annulment that birthed years of authoritarian rule. They also remember the Yaradua health saga, where constitutional silence nearly sparked a leadership vacuum. And they remember how former President Goodluck Jonathan, despite losing power in 2015, was globally praised for peacefully handing over without delay an act seen then as a rare demonstration of constitutional respect in a continent often plagued by sit-tight leaders. Today, Kenneth Okonkwo's statement joins that historical continuum of moments where Nigerians were reminded that democracy is fragile, and that time the duration of a mandate is not just a political unit but a moral contract. The parallels to June 12 are particularly striking. Then, it was the silencing of a presumed winner. Now, it is the fear of extending a mandate not yet validated. In both cases, it is the Constitution that hangs in the balance, and the people's resolve that determines whether the scales tip toward order or chaos. But it's not just old wounds that are surfacing, it's new expectations. In marketplaces, on radio call-ins, and in student unions, conversations have shifted. People are asking, if the Constitution is clear, why is not the practice? If our votes count, why do courts become kingmakers? If justice is delayed, is democracy still alive? These questions aren't academic. They're deeply emotional, tied to years of unemployment, inflation, insecurity, and political betrayal. Kenneth Okonkwo, in that moment, gave voice to a generation that no longer believes silence is golden. Public sentiment is now sharpening into action. Civil society groups are organizing town halls to educate citizens on the legal definitions of tenures and succession. Religious leaders are invoking the message in sermons. Legal advocacy campaigns are emerging under hashtags like #RespectTheConstitution, #ForYearsNoMore, and #JusticeBeforeInauguration. Even Nollywood producers are reportedly scripting storylines inspired by the speech. What started as a soundbite is now becoming a cultural moment, a push toward civic awakening through legal literacy. For the political class, especially the ruling elite, this is a moment of choice. Continue to exploit judicial delay as a backdoor to power, or listen to the thunder building beneath the surface. Because if history has taught anything, it's that Nigerians may endure long, but when they awaken, they move with seismic force. The fall of military rule, the protests against fuel subsidy removals, and the Answers movement are all testaments to what happens when silence is no longer an option. As this script closes, it's worth noting, Kenneth Okonkwo's voice is just one, but it is the kind of voice that, when echoed by millions, becomes a movement. His clarity forced Nigerians to ask, what is the value of a constitution no one respects? And that is the question we must now all answer at the ballot box, in the courts, on the streets, and online. Have you ever wondered how long for years really lasts in Nigerian politics? Is it just a number on paper or a right that must be defended? If you believe democracy should follow the Constitution, not loopholes, then this is your moment. Hit like if you believe for years means for years. DROPA, comment below and tell us, should politicians be allowed to remain in office indefinitely while awaiting legal rulings? Subscribe to stay informed as this story unfolds and new voices rise. Share this video now on WhatsApp, on X, on TikTok, so that the law is not just heard in courtrooms but echoed across the streets of Nigeria. Because the Constitution is not just a book, it's our future.